Wake the rejected Omega on my chest, and you die. The command swept across the royal chamber so quietly that it was somehow more terrifying than a shout. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loudly. More than 300 nobles, generals, council elders, royal servants, and elite guards stood frozen beneath the towering silver arches of Moonfall Palace, every eye fixed on the same impossible sight. King Lucian Ashcroft, the most feared Alpha King in the Northern Territories, remained seated upon the carved obsidian throne that had witnessed wars, treaties, and generations of rulers. Yet today, the throne looked less like the seat of a conqueror and more like a sanctuary. Curled peacefully against his chest, completely unaware of the storm surrounding her, slept a young Omega whose name almost no one inside the palace recognized. Emily Carter's dark brown hair spilled across Lucian's black cloak like soft silk, partially hiding her pale face. Her breathing was slow and steady, the kind that only came after complete exhaustion. One small hand had unconsciously gathered a fold of the king's cloak as though even in sleep she feared someone might pull safety away from her. Lucian never looked down at her. His silver eyes remained fixed upon the trembling noblewoman standing 6 feet away. Lady Vanessa Holloway had entered the royal chamber only moments earlier, expecting another council meeting concerning border disputes. Instead, she had discovered the Alpha King sitting motionless while an unknown rejected Omega slept against him before the entire court. She had laughed at first. Surely this was some elaborate political demonstration. Then she had taken a single cautious step forward, intending to wake the girl herself. She never finished the second step. Lucian's voice had stopped her colder than winter. Now Vanessa's confidence had vanished. Even her expensive sapphire gown could not disguise the slight trembling in her hands. Around her, no one offered support. They all understood the warning had not been spoken out of anger. It had been spoken as absolute law. The chamber itself seemed unwilling to disturb the silence. Golden sunlight filtered through. Towering stained glass windows, painting shifting colors across polished marble floors. Dust floated lazily through beams of light, while enormous banners bearing the royal wolf crest hung perfectly still despite the open windows. Even the palace wolves resting beside the throne refused to stir, as if they too understood someone precious was finally sleeping. Captain Nathan Brooks, commander of the Royal Guard, slowly lowered his gaze. In 23 years of serving Lucian Ashcroft, he had watched the king negotiate impossible alliances, face enemy rulers without blinking, and carry the crushing burden of an entire kingdom with relentless discipline. He had never once seen him postpone a council meeting. He had never seen him ignore urgent military reports. Most unbelievable of all, he had never seen him remain completely motionless for nearly 3 hours simply because someone resting against him looked peaceful. The palace physician quietly approached from the side entrance, carrying a leather medical satchel. He stopped several feet away and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," he whispered carefully, "she should probably be awakened. She may be dehydrated." Lucian's eyes shifted only slightly toward the physician. No, it was a single word. Calm. Controlled. Final. The physician immediately lowered his head and stepped backward without another argument. No one questioned the order. Emily remained asleep, unaware that an entire kingdom had paused around her. She didn't know whispers had already begun spreading through every hallway of the palace. She didn't know servants were quietly wondering whether the mysterious girl was some hidden noblewoman, an ancient prophet, or perhaps the moon goddess herself wearing a human face. She knew none of it. For the first time in what looked like far too many nights, she simply rested without fear. Lucian finally looked down at the sleeping Omega. A faint bruise colored one wrist. Tiny scratches marked her hands, as though she had traveled through miles of forest alone. Even now, her face carried traces of quiet worry, the kind that remained long after nightmares ended. Something inside the Alpha King hardened, not with anger, but with certainty. Whatever road had brought Emily Carter into his arms had left invisible scars deeper than anyone in this room could imagine. And for reasons even he had not yet fully understood, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. No one would take away the first peaceful sleep she had found in years. 3 days earlier, the kingdom had not known Emily Carter's name, and she had preferred it that way. Before sunrise, she stood quietly behind the stone walls of Grey Hollow Pack with a small travel bag clutched against her chest, listening to laughter drift from the great hall where the annual mate ceremony was already beginning. Every unmated wolf over the age of 18 waited for this day with hope, excitement, and dreams of finding the person chosen by destiny. Emily had once believed she would feel the same. Instead, her stomach twisted with quiet dread. She had spent her entire life learning how to become invisible. While other young women practiced elegant dances for festivals, Emily learned how to finish every chore before anyone noticed she had done it. While others proudly displayed the strength of their wolves, she quietly comforted frightened pups, tended injured birds, and helped elderly neighbors repair broken fences without asking for anything in return. Kindness had become her only strength in a world that admired power above all else. The great hall shimmered beneath hundreds of lanterns, their warm light reflecting from polished stone and silver banners embroidered with the crest of Grey Hollow. Music echoed through the crowded room as families whispered hopeful prayers beneath their breath. Emily remained near the back exactly where her aunt had instructed her to stand. "Do not embarrass this family," she had warned before they entered. "If fate has overlooked you, at least have the decency to stay out of everyone's way." Emily had answered with a quiet nod. She no longer argued with people who had already decided her worth. The ceremony began with ancient traditions repeated for generations. One by one, names echoed across the hall as destined pairs stepped forward to joyful applause. Smiles spread across proud parents' faces. Tears filled grateful eyes. Emily applauded every couple with sincere happiness, even as loneliness quietly settled deeper inside her own heart. Then Elder Miriam called the final name. Emily Carter. Hundreds of faces turned toward her. Emily stepped forward carefully, smoothing the simple blue dress her late mother had sewn years before. She searched the room for the familiar face of Daniel Brooks, the young beta who had spent months showing unexpected kindness whenever their paths crossed. Friends had whispered that perhaps destiny had chosen them. Emily had tried not to believe those whispers, but somewhere deep inside, hope had quietly taken root. Daniel walked toward the center of the hall. For one fragile heartbeat, Emily thought the impossible might actually happen. Then he stopped several feet away. His expression carried neither cruelty nor warmth, only discomfort. "I cannot accept this bond," he said, his voice echoing farther than he intended. Murmurs swept through the hall. Daniel lowered his eyes before continuing. "My future belongs beside someone who can strengthen our bloodline and stand proudly beside my family. I wish Emily no harm, but she deserves someone else." Silence lingered for only a moment before whispers replaced it. Some sounded sympathetic. Others did not bother hiding their disappointment. Emily felt every curious glance settle upon her like cold rain, yet she refused to cry. She simply smiled with quiet dignity, bowed respectfully toward the elder, and whispered, "I understand." Her aunt did not wait for the ceremony to finish. She brushed past Emily with an expression harder than stone. "Do not come home until people stop talking about this," she muttered under her breath before disappearing into the celebrating crowd beside relatives who suddenly pretended not to know her. Emily remained standing alone while music slowly resumed around her. Couples laughed together beneath glowing lanterns. Friends embraced. Families celebrated new beginnings. She realized no one had noticed she was still there. She slipped quietly through the enormous wooden doors and stepped into the cool evening air. Above her, the full moon hung brilliantly over the dark forest beyond the village, watching without judgment. Emily wrapped her thin cloak around herself and began walking toward the trees with no destination in mind. Behind her, the celebration continued as though nothing important had happened. Ahead of her stretched miles of silent wilderness. She did not know that every step carrying her farther from Grey Hollow was also carrying her closer to a destiny greater than every person who had just turned away. The forest welcomed Emily Carter with a silence that asked for nothing and judged no one. She followed narrow game trails beneath towering pines until the music from Grey Hollow disappeared behind the whisper of wind through the branches. The first night was colder than she expected. She found shelter beneath an old cedar whose enormous roots rose from the earth like gentle walls, wrapping her thin cloak tighter as moonlight filtered through the leaves above. Sleep came only in short moments. Every unfamiliar sound reminded her that she no longer belonged anywhere. By morning, the last piece of bread she had packed was gone. She drank from a clear stream, thanked the quiet wilderness for its kindness, and continued walking east without knowing why. Hours turned into another day. The farther she traveled, the more the forest changed. Ancient trees replaced younger ones, their massive trunks wrapped with emerald moss that glowed softly beneath patches of sunlight. Wildflowers pushed through carpets of emerald grass, and birds filled the air with songs untouched by the noise of villages or politics. Emily paused often, not because she was lost, but because beauty still had the power to make her stop despite everything that had happened. She whispered apologies whenever she accidentally stepped on delicate flowers, and carefully returned a baby turtle to the creek after finding it stranded on the muddy bank. Nobody saw these small acts. Nobody praised them. She simply could not ignore something that needed help. By late afternoon, hunger settled heavily inside her. Her legs ached after walking nearly 15 miles, and her boots had begun rubbing painful blisters against her heels. She considered turning toward the nearest town, but the thought of curious stares and whispered questions tightened something inside her chest. Instead, she wandered deeper into the trees until a faint sound drifted across the breeze. It was barely louder than a sigh. Emily stopped immediately. The sound came again, a soft, frightened whimper. She followed it through thick undergrowth, carefully pushing aside low branches until she reached a small clearing where sunlight spilled across a bed of fallen leaves. There, beneath a broken log, lay a tiny silver wolf pup no larger than a household dog. One of its front legs was trapped beneath heavy wood, and exhaustion had stolen almost all of its strength. Its bright blue eyes lifted toward Emily with quiet fear, but no anger. She slowly knelt several feet away, lowering her hands to show she meant no harm. "It is all right," she whispered gently. "I am not going to leave you." The frightened pup tried to growl, but only another weak whimper escaped. Emily studied the fallen log. It was too heavy to lift with strength alone, but years spent helping repair barns and fences had taught her to think before forcing anything. She searched nearby until she found a sturdy branch nearly 4 feet long. Sliding it beneath the log, she used a flat stone as support and carefully leaned her weight against the makeshift lever. The old wood shifted just enough. The trapped paw slipped free. The pup immediately tried to stand but stumbled after only a single step. Emily quickly removed her own cloak despite the cool mountain air and wrapped the trembling little wolf inside its warmth. "Easy," she whispered with a tired smile. "You have been brave long enough." She examined the small leg as gently as she could. Nothing appeared broken, only badly strained. She dipped a clean cloth into the nearby stream and carefully wiped away dirt before gathering broad healing leaves her mother had once taught her to recognize. The little wolf watched every movement with remarkable intelligence, never once trying to bite her. Instead, after several quiet minutes, it rested its small head against Emily's arm and closed its eyes. She smiled for the first time since leaving Grey Hollow. "There you are," she whispered. "You just needed someone to stay." She never noticed the faint silver crest hidden beneath the thick fur near the pup's shoulder, nor the tiny collar concealed beneath tangled leaves. She did not know the royal family marked every air with that ancient symbol. She did not know hundreds of elite guards were searching every valley within 50 miles. She only knew that an innocent life had crossed her path, and that was enough. As evening settled across the mountains, Emily cradled the sleeping pup against her chest and continued deeper into the quiet forest, completely unaware that unseen eyes had already begun following every step she took. Night settled gently across the northern mountains, painting the endless forest in shades of deep blue and silver. Emily Carter sat beside a small stream, her back resting against an ancient oak while the tiny wolf pup slept peacefully beside her, wrapped inside the cloak she had willingly given away despite the growing cold. She dipped her fingers into the clear water and smiled quietly when the little wolf stirred only long enough to nuzzle closer before drifting back to sleep. "You are going to be all right," she whispered. "Tomorrow we will find somewhere safe." Several hundred yards away, hidden among towering evergreens, another pair of silver eyes watched the scene without making a sound. King Lucian Ashcroft stood perfectly still beneath the shadows, his black traveling cloak blending almost seamlessly into the forest around him. Beside him waited Captain Nathan Brooks and 6 members of the Royal Guard, each prepared to rush forward the instant their king gave the order. None of them moved. None of them even reached for a weapon. Lucian raised one hand ever so slightly, silently commanding absolute patience. His gaze never left the young woman beside the stream. They had spent nearly 3 days searching every valley, mountain trail, and abandoned cabin after the disappearance of Prince Oliver, the only surviving son of Lucian's late older brother. Search parties had followed countless false trails before discovering tiny paw prints leading toward this forgotten corner of the royal forest. Lucian had expected to find frightened hunters, desperate thieves, or perhaps frightened travelers trying to claim a reward. He had not expected to find an exhausted Omega sharing her only source of warmth with a lost child she believed to be an ordinary wolf pup. Captain Brooks quietly stepped closer. "Your Majesty," he whispered carefully, "shall we retrieve the prince now?" Lucian answered without looking away. "No." Nathan blinked. "Sir, look carefully." The captain followed the king's gaze. Emily carefully adjusted the makeshift bandage around the little wolf's injured leg before tearing another narrow strip from the sleeve of her own dress to reinforce it. Her fingers moved with remarkable gentleness despite their obvious exhaustion. After finishing, she stroked the pup behind one ear, smiling when its small tail wagged once against the blanket of fallen leaves. "She has not once checked his collar," Lucian said quietly. "She has not searched for valuables. She has not attempted to discover who he belongs to." Nathan nodded slowly. "She believes he is simply another creature that needed help." "Exactly." Silence settled between them once again. Lucian had ruled for 15 years. During that time, he had met countless nobles who spoke proudly about honor, kindness, and loyalty while calculating every conversation for personal advantage. Even acts of generosity usually arrived carrying invisible expectations. Watching Emily now felt strangely unfamiliar. There was no audience, no applause, no promise of reward. She had every reason to protect herself first, yet she had chosen compassion without hesitation. The tiny wolf suddenly opened his bright blue eyes. The moment he saw Lucian standing between the trees, his ears lifted with instant recognition. Before he could make a sound, Lucian slowly raised one finger to his lips. The prince tilted his head for a brief second before settling back against Emily's side, understanding the silent request with surprising maturity for one so young. A faint smile almost touched Lucian's face before disappearing again. "He trusts her," Nathan murmured. "He does." The king had not seen the young prince sleep peacefully since his parents had died 2 years earlier. Fear usually woke the child several times each night, leaving palace healers helpless despite every effort. Yet here, beneath an ordinary oak tree beside an unknown Omega, the little prince rested more peacefully than he had in months. Hours passed quietly. Emily finally leaned her head against the rough bark behind her, fighting to keep her eyes open. Hunger, fatigue, and days of relentless walking slowly claimed what little strength remained. She glanced once toward the sleeping pup to make certain it was warm before whispering, "You are safe now." Those became the last words she managed before her eyelids finally closed. Her breathing grew slower with every passing minute until exhaustion carried her completely into sleep. Lucian remained motionless for several long moments, studying the peaceful expression that had replaced the quiet sadness she had carried all evening. Then, without speaking, he stepped from the shadows and walked toward the sleeping Omega, unaware that this single decision would quietly change both of their lives forever. Lucian Ashcroft stopped beside the sleeping Omega and lowered himself to one knee, careful not to disturb either of the exhausted souls resting beneath the old oak. The tiny silver wolf opened his eyes again and quietly climbed into the king's waiting arms before gently touching his nose against Lucian's chin. Relief, long hidden beneath the Alpha King's calm expression, softened his silver eyes for only a brief moment. "Welcome home, Oliver," he whispered so quietly that even the wind nearly carried the words away. The little prince answered with a contented sigh before looking back toward Emily, as if unwilling to leave her behind. Lucian understood immediately. He glanced toward Captain Nathan Brooks, who had already stepped into the clearing with the royal guard. Every soldier froze the moment they saw the sleeping young woman. Her face looked far younger in peaceful rest than it had beneath the weight of exhaustion. Faint shadows beneath her eyes hinted at many sleepless nights, while the worn fabric of her dress revealed weeks, perhaps months, of hardship. Captain Brooks spoke in a careful whisper. "Your Majesty, shall we prepare a carriage for the prince?" Lucian gently stroked Oliver behind one ear before answering. "For both of them." Nathan hesitated only a second. "The Omega as well?" "She does not stay behind." The captain bowed immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty." Two palace attendants quietly unfolded thick wool blankets from their travel packs. Lucian accepted one himself and carefully draped it around Emily without waking her. Even while sleeping, she instinctively reached toward the warmth. Her fingers found the edge of his cloak, lightly holding it as though afraid it might disappear. Lucian remained perfectly still. She had no idea who stood beside her. She was simply following the quiet instinct of someone who had gone too long without feeling safe. "She trusts you," Nathan observed softly. Lucian looked down at the sleeping woman. "No," he replied. "She trusts kindness. There is a difference." The journey back to Moonfall Palace began beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. Rather than placing Emily inside one of the royal wagons, Lucian quietly lifted her into his own arms. She weighed far less than he expected. Weeks of hardship had left her thin, though not fragile. She instinctively settled closer against his chest without opening her eyes, her breathing remaining slow and peaceful. Nathan watched with open surprise. During 15 years of service, he had never seen the king carry anyone unless duty demanded it. Yet now Lucian walked nearly 2 miles through uneven forest trails without allowing another person to take her place. The little prince rode happily beside them in Nathan's arms, glancing toward Emily every few moments as though making certain she remained nearby. Before dawn, the towering gates of Moonfall Palace slowly opened. Guards standing watch immediately lowered their heads in respect, but more than one pair of eyes widened upon seeing the sleeping stranger cradled against their king's chest. Questions silently spread from one soldier to another, yet no one dared ask them aloud. Inside the palace, royal physician Eleanor Hayes hurried forward, carrying medical supplies. She smiled with relief upon seeing Prince Oliver awake and healthy before shifting her attention toward the unconscious young woman. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "I should examine her immediately." Lucian nodded once. Carefully, Emily was carried into a quiet guest chamber overlooking the eastern gardens. Soft morning light filtered through lace curtains, while fresh flowers filled the room with the scent of lavender and white jasmine. The physician completed her examination with remarkable gentleness before turning toward the king. "She is not seriously ill," Eleanor explained. "She is simply exhausted. Mild dehydration, hunger, and complete physical fatigue. Her body is finally allowing itself to rest." Lucian looked toward Emily, who had not stirred once throughout the examination. "How long?" Eleanor considered carefully. "Perhaps several more hours. Perhaps longer. I believe her body has been surviving on determination alone. Now that she feels safe, it is refusing to wake until it has recovered." Lucian remained silent. He dismissed everyone except 2 trusted attendants before taking a chair beside the bed. Hours passed as sunlight slowly crossed the polished wooden floor. Reports from neighboring kingdoms waited unanswered. Council meetings quietly postponed themselves. Military commanders exchanged puzzled glances outside the chamber doors. None of it seemed important. Shortly after noon, Emily shifted slightly in her sleep. Her brow tightened as though an old nightmare had found her once again. Without thinking, Lucian reached forward and gently covered her trembling hand with his own. Almost instantly, the worry faded from her face. Her breathing steadied. Then, still completely asleep, she slowly turned toward him, rested her head against his shoulder, and drifted into an even deeper, more peaceful sleep than before. Outside the chamber, 2 astonished attendants exchanged speechless glances, unaware that within only a few more hours, this quiet moment would become the single most astonishing sight the entire kingdom had ever witnessed. The quiet miracle inside the eastern guest chamber did not remain a secret for long. Moonfall Palace had been built from polished white stone, but like every great castle, its walls could never contain whispers. By mid-afternoon, Servants carrying fresh linens had noticed the royal physician leaving the chamber with an unusually gentle smile. Kitchen staff had seen trays prepared for two unexpected guests. Stable hands had watched the king cancel a military inspection for the first time in more than a decade. Every observation became another thread in a rumor that spread through the palace faster than the evening breeze. By sunset, the story had reached the noble district beyond the palace gates. Some claimed the Alpha King had secretly chosen a bride. Others insisted an ancient prophet had arrived during the night. A few even whispered that the moon goddess herself had entered the royal palace disguised as a humble traveler. None of them imagined the truth was far simpler. An exhausted young woman was finally sleeping without fear. Inside the chamber, soft golden light spilled across the floor as the afternoon slowly faded into evening. Emily remained asleep with her head resting comfortably against Lucian's shoulder, completely unaware that the kingdom had begun discussing her existence. Her breathing had become stronger, and the color had slowly returned to her pale cheeks after several warm meals prepared by the palace kitchen had been carefully saved for whenever she finally awakened. Prince Oliver lay peacefully on a nearby cushion, occasionally lifting his head to glance toward Emily before curling back into another contented nap. Every so often, he quietly wagged his tail as though reassured that both of the people he trusted most remained close together. Royal physician Eleanor Hayes returned once more, stopping respectfully several feet away. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "Her pulse is much stronger now. She has begun recovering." Lucian nodded slightly without disturbing Emily. "Then we continue waiting." Eleanor hesitated before speaking again. "The High Council has gathered in the Western Hall. They have requested your presence twice already." Lucian looked toward the tall windows where the first evening stars had begun appearing. "Above the mountains. Tell them tomorrow." Eleanor smiled faintly. I believe they expected that answer. She quietly left the room, closing the heavy wooden door behind her. Outside, Captain Nathan Brooks waited beside two palace guards. "How is she?" he asked softly. "Recovering," Eleanor replied. "His Majesty refuses to let anyone interrupt her rest." Nathan glanced toward the closed door and allowed himself a thoughtful smile. "Then I suppose the entire kingdom can wait a little longer." Unfortunately, not everyone shared his patience. Across the palace, Lady Vanessa Holloway paced elegantly across the marble floor of her private sitting room. She had spent years believing she would eventually become the queen beside Lucian Ashcroft. Their families had encouraged the possibility. Court advisors had quietly supported the idea. Even foreign ambassadors often assumed the match was inevitable. Yet now every servant seemed interested in speaking about an unknown Omega instead. Vanessa tightened her grip around the crystal teacup in her hand before setting it down untouched. "Find out who she is," she instructed her personal attendant. "Where she came from. Why she is here. I want answers before sunrise." The attendant bowed immediately and hurried away. An hour later, members of the High Council assembled outside the Eastern guest wing despite Lucian's earlier refusal. Elder Thomas Whitmore adjusted his ceremonial robes before quietly addressing Captain Brooks. "We understand His Majesty is occupied, but matters of state cannot simply pause." Nathan respectfully folded his hands behind his back. "Neither can someone's recovery." Another council member frowned. "Surely one sleeping Omega cannot outweigh the responsibilities of an entire kingdom." Before Nathan could answer, the chamber door slowly opened. Every conversation immediately stopped. Lucian stepped into the hallway with calm, measured movements before quietly closing the door behind him. His expression revealed neither irritation nor exhaustion, only complete certainty. The council members bowed respectfully, though more than one pair of curious eyes drifted toward the closed door behind him. "Elder," Whitmore cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, we hoped the young woman might be awakened so these important discussions could proceed without further delay." Lucian's silver eyes rested calmly upon each face before he answered in the same composed voice that had guided kingdoms through years of peace and hardship alike. "She has spent far too long living without rest. She will not lose this one because others lack patience." No one spoke. No one argued. Even the evening breeze moving through the palace corridors seemed to fall silent as the king's quiet words settled over everyone present. Behind the closed chamber door, Emily shifted slightly in her sleep, still unaware that beyond those walls an entire kingdom had just been told that, For this one extraordinary night, her peace mattered more than politics. Morning sunlight stretched across the eastern wing of Moonfall Palace, but the quiet peace inside the guest chamber could not silence the growing storm outside its doors. Noble families arrived one after another, each carrying polished smiles that barely concealed restless curiosity. Advisors whispered beneath painted ceilings. Servants avoided eye contact while carrying silver trays through crowded hallways. Every corridor seemed to hold the same unanswered question. Who was the mysterious Omega important enough to make the Alpha King ignore the entire royal court? Lady Vanessa Holloway refused to wait any longer. Dressed in an elegant emerald gown trimmed with silver embroidery, she crossed the palace corridors with practiced confidence, followed by 2 ladies-in-waiting and several influential nobles eager to witness whatever happened next. She stopped outside the eastern guest chamber where Captain Nathan Brooks calmly stood beside the entrance. "Please announce me," Vanessa said politely. Nathan remained perfectly still. "His Majesty has requested complete privacy." Vanessa smiled, though the warmth never reached her eyes. "I only wish to greet our unexpected guest." That request has also been declined. The hallway grew noticeably quieter as more council members gathered nearby, pretending to discuss state affairs while openly watching the conversation. "Unfold." Vanessa folded her hands gracefully. Surely one conversation cannot disturb someone who has slept nearly an entire day. Nathan answered with the same calm expression. "That decision belongs to His Majesty." For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Vanessa took one careful step toward the chamber door. Nathan immediately shifted just enough to block her path without touching her. "Lady Holloway." His voice remained respectful. "Please." She stopped only inches away. "Captain Brooks, I have known the king for years." "I know. Then you understand I have every reason to be concerned." Nathan nodded once. Concern and permission are not the same. A faint ripple of uncomfortable silence spread through the watching crowd. Vanessa's smile finally disappeared. "Stand aside." Before Nathan could answer, the heavy wooden door quietly opened from the inside. Every conversation vanished instantly. Lucian Ashcroft stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Even that small movement revealed his intention. The sound of the latch settling into place echoed through the silent corridor like the closing of a gate protecting something precious. His silver eyes calmly surveyed the gathering. "Good morning," he said. No one answered immediately. Elder Thomas Whitmore finally stepped forward with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty, the council understands your compassion, but the kingdom requires leadership." Rumors continue spreading. Many simply wish to understand who the young woman is. Lucian regarded him without irritation. "When she awakens, she will decide what others may know." Vanessa took a slow breath before speaking. "With respect, Your Majesty, she is an unknown stranger inside the royal residence. Surely someone should wake her and ask the necessary questions." Lucian's gaze shifted toward Vanessa. His expression never hardened, yet the atmosphere inside the hallway seemed to grow heavier all the same. "She has answered enough questions for one lifetime." Vanessa blinked, surprised by the unexpected reply. "How could you possibly know that?" Lucian remained silent for several moments before speaking again. "Someone who sleeps this deeply after reaching safety has not been resting. She has been surviving." Those words settled over the gathering with quiet weight. Even several palace servants lowered their eyes. They had noticed the worn boots, the patched dress, and the healing scratches upon Emily's hands. None of them had considered what those details truly meant. Vanessa glanced toward the closed chamber door once more. "Then allow me to help her." She extended one hand toward the polished brass handle. Before her fingers came within inches of the door, Lucian calmly stepped between her and the entrance. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stood there with the unshakable certainty of a king who had already made his decision. No one enters. The hallway became completely silent. Even distant footsteps from another corridor seemed to fade away. Nathan watched the assembled nobles carefully. None of them challenged the order. None of them even attempted another step. After a long pause, Lucian looked once toward the closed door behind him before quietly adding, "There will be time for introductions after she opens her eyes on her own." Inside the chamber, completely unaware of the kingdom waiting beyond the walls, Emily stirred gently in her sleep for the first time since arriving at the palace. while Prince Oliver lifted his head with a happy little wag of his tail, as though he somehow knew that the moment everyone had been waiting for was finally drawing near. Emily Carter awoke slowly, as though sunlight itself were gently calling her back instead of urgency or fear. The first thing she noticed was warmth. Not the biting chill of the forest floor or the damp air beneath ancient trees, but the comforting warmth of a quiet room filled with soft morning light. She remained perfectly still, afraid that if she moved too quickly the peaceful feeling might disappear like another dream. The scent of fresh lavender drifted through the air, carried by a gentle breeze flowing between tall windows that overlooked gardens blooming with white roses and blue lilies. For several long seconds, she simply listened. No shouting, no mocking laughter, no hurried footsteps chasing her away, only birds singing somewhere beyond the glass. She slowly opened her eyes. An unfamiliar ceiling stretched high above her, painted with silver stars against a pale blue sky. Elegant curtains swayed softly beside polished stone walls unlike anything she had ever seen before. Panic immediately flickered inside her chest. She pushed herself upright too quickly before dizziness forced her to stop. Easy. The calm voice reached her before she recognized the man speaking. Emily turned and found Lucian Ashcroft sitting quietly beside the bed, a book resting unopened upon his lap. His silver eyes met hers without judgment or expectation. She stared for several heartbeats before her mind caught up with reality. She had seen portraits of the Alpha King hanging inside Village Hall since childhood. They had always painted him surrounded by soldiers and ceremonies, distant and impossible. Seeing him only a few feet away felt unreal. Emily immediately tried climbing out of bed. "Your Majesty, I am so sorry." Her words tumbled over one another in embarrassment. "I did not mean to stay. I should leave immediately. I am sorry if I caused trouble. I will not bother anyone any longer." She reached the edge of the bed before her tired legs nearly gave way beneath her. Lucian stood at once, not to restrain her, but simply to steady her until she regained her balance. The gesture was gentle enough that Emily looked even more confused. "You have caused no trouble," he said quietly. Emily lowered her eyes. "People usually say that before asking me to leave." Silence settled between them. Prince Oliver suddenly trotted happily across the room, no longer in his wolf form, but now appearing as a cheerful little boy with bright blue eyes and silver blonde hair. "Miss Emily," he exclaimed before stopping beside her with a wide smile. "You woke up." Emily blinked in complete surprise. "You?" She looked from the smiling child to Lucian before recognition slowly dawned. "The little wolf." Oliver nodded enthusiastically. "That was me." Emily covered her mouth with one trembling hand. "I did not know." "I know," Oliver answered happily. "That is why Uncle Lucian says you are special." Emily looked back toward the king, completely overwhelmed. "I only wanted to help." "Exactly," Lucian replied. She struggled to understand. "I did not save a prince because he was a prince." "I know. I would have done the same for anyone." A faint warmth touched Lucian's expression. "I know that as well." Emily looked down at her hands, suddenly uncertain what to say. She noticed they had been carefully cleaned and the small cuts from the forest had already been treated. Even the torn sleeve she had sacrificed to bandage the little wolf had been gently repaired. Someone had taken extraordinary care of things she had believed nobody would notice. Her voice became almost a whisper. "Why?" Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question so simple that it caught her completely unprepared. "Emily." She slowly looked up. "When was the last time someone allowed you to sleep without fear?" The room became impossibly quiet. Emily opened her mouth, intending to answer quickly, but no words came. Instead, memories surfaced one after another. Nights spent worrying about tomorrow, listening for footsteps outside her door, wondering whether she still belonged anywhere, falling asleep only after convincing herself she would survive one more day. She searched desperately for an answer and realized she could not remember one. Tears quietly filled her eyes before she could stop them. I do not know," she whispered. "Maybe." Her voice broke gently. "Maybe when my mother was still alive." She quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own tears. Lucian offered neither pity nor empty reassurance. He simply handed her a neatly folded handkerchief and waited patiently while she gathered herself. For the first time in many years, Emily discovered what true kindness felt like when it expected absolutely nothing in return. By noon, the royal assembly hall had filled beyond capacity. Noble families stood beneath towering marble columns draped with silver banners, while military commanders lined the outer walls in polished ceremonial armor. Council elders whispered among themselves, uncertain why the Alpha King had summoned every influential house in the kingdom with almost no notice. Rumors still drifted through the crowd like autumn leaves. Some believed a declaration of war was coming. Others expected an announcement concerning Prince Oliver's disappearance. No one expected the great bronze doors to open and reveal the quiet young Omega walking beside the king himself. Emily Carter hesitated just inside the entrance, overwhelmed by hundreds of unfamiliar faces turning toward her all at once. Her simple pale blue dress had been carefully mended by the palace attendants, yet it remained modest beside the luxurious gowns surrounding her. Instinctively, she slowed her steps, prepared to move behind Lucian so she would not attract attention. Instead, without saying a single word, the Alpha King adjusted his pace until they walked side by side. The small gesture did not escape the crowd. Prince Oliver happily skipped a few steps ahead before turning with an excited smile. "Come on, Miss Emily. Everyone is waiting." Emily managed a nervous smile before following him toward the center of the grand hall. Elder Thomas Whitmore stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, we are assembled." Lucian nodded once before his calm silver eyes swept across the room. The quiet conversations faded until complete silence settled over the hall. 3 days ago, Lucian began, my nephew disappeared beyond our borders. A ripple of concern moved through the gathering. Hundreds searched for him. Experienced trackers followed countless trails. Elite guards crossed mountains and forests without success. Lucian looked toward Emily. One person found him. Every eye shifted toward the young woman beside him. Emily immediately lowered her gaze, uncomfortable beneath so much attention. Lucian continued. She did not know his name. She did not recognize the royal crest hidden beneath his fur. She expected no reward. She simply saw someone who needed help. Prince Oliver quietly reached for Emily's hand. "She gave me her cloak because I was cold," he said proudly. "She stayed with me all night." Several nobles exchanged thoughtful glances. Lucian's voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable conviction. Strength is often measured by power, position, or bloodline. Yet none of those things protected the future of this kingdom when it mattered most. Compassion did. The great hall remained perfectly still. Lady Vanessa Holloway slowly lowered her eyes, saying nothing. Even those who had questioned Emily's presence found no argument against what had already been witnessed. Lucian turned fully toward Emily. "Miss Carter." She looked up uncertainly. "You entered this palace believing you were alone." Emily nodded faintly. "You believed kindness made you weak." Tears quietly gathered again, though this time they were not born from sadness. I did." Lucian smiled, a rare expression that transformed the stern features so many had feared for years. "You were mistaken." He gently placed one hand over his heart before addressing the entire kingdom. "From this day forward, Emily Carter stands under the protection of the crown. She will be treated with the same respect shown to every honored guest of Moonfall Palace. Anyone who cannot offer that respect will answer to me." No cheers erupted. No dramatic celebration followed. Instead, something far more meaningful happened. One by one, the assembled nobles bowed their heads. Military officers followed. Palace servants did the same. Even Elder Whitmore placed one hand over his heart in quiet acknowledgement. It was not fear that moved them. It was recognition. Emily stood speechless as the people who would never have noticed her only days before now honored her with simple dignity. Prince Oliver squeezed her hand. "See," he whispered with a bright smile. "I told you Uncle Lucian was right." Emily looked around the hall before her eyes returned to the king. For the first time since losing her home, she no longer felt invisible. She did not need a throne, a title, or wealth to discover her worth. She only needed someone willing to see the kindness she had never stopped carrying, even when the world overlooked it. Later that evening, as the palace gardens glowed beneath the first stars, Emily sat quietly on a stone bench overlooking a peaceful fountain, while Prince Oliver chased glowing fireflies across the grass. Lucian joined her. Without ceremony, saying nothing for a long while. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than empty. Emily looked toward the moon rising above the distant mountains and smiled with quiet gratitude. Somewhere beyond those forests, the life she had lost was fading into memory. Here, she had found something she never expected to receive. Not privilege, not riches, simply a place where kindness was finally welcomed home.